Okay, well, maybe I'll get started here. Nadia and Jody and everyone. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon. We've got people that have registered from various parts of Canada, mainly Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but from Canada and even from the United States. So we hope that our United States guest is able to join us. My name is Larry Michalczyk, and I'm the FAST representative for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Now, if you don't know, FAST is an acronym for Fighting Antisemitism Together, and it's the host organization to Voices into Action. So just a bit of background. Prior to my role with FAST, I was a curriculum coach for 2 years, and prior to that, I spent 30 years teaching in 3 different schools in Saskatchewan, mainly high school and some middle years. I'm also a proud member of the Holodomor Awareness and Education Committee as an honorary Ukrainian Canadian.
My name is Nadia Prokopchuk, and I'm the chair of the Provincial Holodomor Awareness and Education Committee. And this is a committee of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress of Saskatchewan. I've worked as a teacher, a curriculum writer, and consultant with the Provincial Ministry of Education in Saskatchewan. And currently, I'm an EAL teaching specialist at the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm proud to have been the lead writer for the Voices into Action chapter that you'll be hearing about today. And I did this together with my former education colleague, George Zarabecki. And I was also one of the writers who developed the grade 3 integrated teaching unit, How a Grain of Wheat Links Two Worlds. So I'm excited to be able to share the work of our Saskatchewan writing team with you today.
So I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce my colleague from British Columbia. Jody Dirksen is waving at everybody there. She's agreed to facilitate the question and answer segment of today's webinar. She is also the Director of Educational Programs for FAST in British Columbia. And so experiencing much nicer weather than we are having here today in Saskatchewan. Not that it's bad, but it's just not Vancouver. So if you have any questions that you would like us to address, we'd ask you that you enter them into either the question and answer bot or the chat bot, and we will discuss those answers or your questions and answers at the end of our webinar. As this webinar is being recorded and hosted on the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation website and the UCC website, we thought we'd create a clean recording and then leave room for those questions afterwards. So in this workshop, we are very pleased to be sharing 2 online resources with you. And as Nadia has mentioned earlier, and as an educator, I can appreciate that all of you as teachers are often seeking solid instructional and learning resources that address challenging curriculum that you may or may not know about, but often don't have the time to create something or even know where to start looking for something that is both sound and reliable. Voices into Action had so impressed our provincial Holodomor committee that they knew it was something that they would wanted to support and promote within the Ukrainian community. The Holodomor committee's contribution to Voices into Action is what we're sharing with you today in the first part of our webinar. Now, this educational resource presents information about world genocides. It offers the right context for an extended discussion on Holodomor at the high school level. To be clear, our webinar today is not focusing on the events and history of the Holodomor, but rather on 2 teaching resources to help you to teach your students about the history and impact of the Holodomor.
So I will be presenting information about the integrated teaching unit, How a Grain of Wheat Linked Two Worlds, in the second part of this presentation. This teaching unit grew out of a need for a teaching resource on the Holodomor for the elementary grades. It was important to our Holodomor committee that the resource touch on the topic very gently in an age and grade appropriate manner. So using wheat as a central focus, and of course, we live in Saskatchewan, and this is a common and important topic for many of us. So using wheat as that central focus, students are drawn into a discussion of hunger. So we certainly hope that by the end of this webinar, you will see these online resources as valuable additions to your classroom teaching.
So I just want to give a brief background to our resources from Fighting Anti-Semitism Together. Our first program was started in 2005 called Choose Your Voice, and it is geared to grades 5 to 8. So for those of you that teach in the middle years, we'd welcome you to have a look at our Choose Your Voice program. And our second program was initiated 10 years later. It's called Voices into Action, and it's an online program for secondary students focusing on social justice and human rights. So within the Choose Your Voice, we have 4 cross-curricular teaching units developed by the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. We have 4 videos and 28 supporting fact sheets, as well as the curriculum connections for all provinces and territories. So I'm just going to move to the next slide. Thank you. So Voices into Action is a Canadian and international focus, while the Choose Your Voice has a particular Canadian focus. Now you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner that we've included a QR code. So we're going to encourage you to use your cell phones to access our Voices into Action website using that QR code in the right-hand corner. So we encourage you to register on the website so that you can have full access to all of our resources and features. Now, these resources, as if you don't already know, are free for all teachers, and you'll note that we also provide a companion student website for your students to use. So feel free to browse through our website to, while we're doing the initial stages of this webinar. On our website, Voices into Action website, we feature 30 professionally developed lessons, again from OISE, from the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and by professionals in the field. We also have over 30 supporting videos, including the Honorable Jean Augustine. We have genocide survivors, residential school survivor, victims of racism and prejudice. We have academics and former supremacist or neo-Nazi members that are part of our video collection as well. And we also have some group collections of people discussing the impact of racism in their lives. All of our lessons are customizable and PDF downloadable. So there's one full-time executive that we have here in Canada that oversees the other 4 of us. So I'm just going to move on. I see, Jody, you're answering some of the questions for me. Thank you very much. So, Nadia.
Yes, on the screen you'll see that the Holodomor Awareness and Education Committee is dedicated to awareness, education, commemoration, and collaboration. It was in the spirit of collaboration that discussions began between FAST and the UCC Saskatchewan office in 2016. David Katesman, who was the FAST representative at that time, shared the educational resource Voices into Action with UCC and our Holodomor committee members. He stated that the unit on world genocides was incomplete without a chapter about the Holodomor. And so the UCC agreed to search for a writer or writers to take on this task. After a summer writing blitz, the chapter was complete. As I said previously, I wrote the chapter text and selected all of the artifacts, while my colleague, George Zarabecki, agreed to develop the historical timeline. This chapter is available in English and French, and just this past summer, the material was also translated into Ukrainian, and a PDF copy of the Ukrainian text is available within the chapter. So now we'll turn back to Larry, who will provide more details.
Thank you, Nadia. So, of course, as teachers, we know we don't need to look too far to see blatant examples of current human rights issues worldwide. And we've just listed a few on the screen in front of you. We know that one of the more recent issues in the United States was in response to the George Floyd death, and we saw the Black Lives Matter movement, mushroom, not just in the United States, but in Canada and across the globe. We've seen issues in Myanmar, the Crimea, with the invasion and occupation of Ukrainian territory. We've seen protests in Hong Kong, protesting the rights of the the citizens there to maintain democracy. We've seen China repress people in Tibet and religious groups, the Muslims and Chinese Christians within the Chinese areas of influence. We've also seen Turkey's invasion of Syria and the attack on the Kurds. But what about here in Canada? Can we think of exemplars closer to home? Well, I just recently gave a presentation on the increase of racism during this time of COVID. We've seen several groups that are experiencing greater amount of racism because of COVID-19. We've seen immigration and Islamophobia rear its head here in Canada. We've seen immigration and employment issues. We've also been working through the challenges of residential schools and helping our First Nations to get on an equal footing with the rest of the Canadians. And we've seen numerous court cases that deal with issues of racism. So looking at the content in Voices into Action, and again, I've got the QR code up at the top. If you haven't accessed it yet with your cell phone, feel free to do so. All of our lessons have been professionally developed by curriculum experts, and we are proud that they are cross-curricular. We emphasize the fact that they promote critical thinking through differentiated instruction. Our resources address not only genocide, but human rights education, as you can see by the list in front of you. We also look at genocides, and of course, one of our most recent additions to the genocides that are dealt with in our resources, the Cambodian genocide. One of our goals is to support teachers in a cross-curricular manner by providing these lessons so that we can combat all forms of intolerances. One of our main goals is to empower students to take positive action and give them the tools to combat prejudice and racism by becoming actively engaged rather than standing by or by staying what we sometimes refer to as bystanders. So why is the role of educators so critical? I mean, we're all educators and past and present, and we know that teaching history is a very weighty responsibility. Teaching human rights is weighty. We're always trying to make connections as we educate new generations. We look to foster critical thinking, and we use historical thinking or the historical thinking model to try to accomplish that. So as teachers, we're always asking questions of our students, not just what happened, but we ask why a lot of the time. Why does it matter to me? Why does it matter now? We try to help our students to make sense of how we got to this place. We uncover the implications for today's decision makers and the actions they undertake. Then we ask, well, where do we go from here? We teach our students how to discern points of view as we continue to ask questions like, whose version of history are we learning? What are the various perspectives that were or are evident? Is it propaganda or is it truth? What is the supporting evidence? We look at racism and ethnocentrism. As teachers, we examine the contrived social hierarchies that exist. We look at maternal and paternal structures. We ask, how is ethnicity addressed by the ruling power or by authority? When it comes to human rights and exploring human rights, we continue to ask important questions. What rights do each of us have simply for being alive and members of our nation? What protects us? What responsibilities do we have? What is their relationship to the common good? We study the Canadian Charter of Rights, United Nations Rights of the Child, UN Rights of the Indigenous Peoples, or the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And bullying, well, we've all had to deal with that in our classrooms and continue to deal with that on a daily basis sometimes. As teachers, we deal with it on the playgrounds and in schools. We try to educate our students in dealing with it in their communities. And of course, there's the scourge of the cyberbullying that our students have to deal with. So we try to train our students to employ the appropriate social skills as they interact with each other. Citizenship is of course, the last slide. I'm sorry, I moved the slide forward, but it was the last thing there on our slide. And we also look at what makes a good citizen. And maybe that's the key question, is what makes a good citizen? I had a discussion with the superintendent at one time about well, what is digital citizenship versus citizenship? And he maintained that citizenship is really the umbrella of all relations within our nation and within our communities. So the time is right for effective education. We know that. The question is why? Why is a resource such as Voices into Action relevant now? Well, of course, we know that history tends to repeat itself. All you have to do is look at evidence from sites like Genocide Watch. We know that human rights violations are on the rise. Again, I can direct you to Genocide Watch or the Human Rights Watch websites. We know that the past connects with the present. All we have to do is look at anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and now we see Holocaust denial. And of course, the rise in anti-Semitism in many communities around the world. We know that bystander apathy opens the way to atrocities. And we look at Stanton's 10 stages of genocide within our teaching units. And that's one way of seeing how what we do can connect to genocide. Discrimination and prejudice, we know, is very harmful within our society. And so we must teach our students to take action. We've heard too often that, and not just from students, we hear this from others around us, adults, that I get my news from Facebook. Now that's frankly somewhat scary. We know that recipients of propaganda with the loudest voice garners popularity, and thus we know that people tend to consider what is true based on whether it's reality or not, based on the loudest voice sometimes. The most outrageous story seems to be what people tend to follow. And of course, we know that the outrageous stories tend to trend the best. And on Facebook, we know there are no fact checkers. We have spin doctors like Giuliani or Fox News journalists or some world leaders who seed doubt and confusion. We just have to look south of the border to see that at times. They try to normalize the abnormal by creating absurd statements or create new terminology like alternative truths, as we've heard Kellyanne Conway create that term for the phrase lack of truth. We know that using our phones and on our computers, that there are logarithms that feed our pop-ups with only one side of the story. And we therefore need to be consciously seeking ways to find alternative perspectives. And as teachers, our students need to do the same. We live with interdependence of global economies. Production of cheap goods in poor countries almost always includes human rights violations. We see it through slave labor, violence, and suppression. As Nadia mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress Saskatchewan was invited to partner and provide the Holodomor unit, which would complete the Voices into Action study of genocides recognized by our Canadian government. So FAST was committed to creating a Made in Canada educational resource, and now there is a significant Saskatchewan contribution. Our Voices into Action statistics illustrate that this resource is not only relevant for Canada, but is being accessed by people in other countries as well. You'll see before you some selection of classes or courses available in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where the chapter on the Holodomor has a direct connection. So the rationale is very clear. So we need to recognize the Holodomor as a world genocide. We need to validate its place in history through the use of artifacts, timelines, historical evidence, and survivor interviews. We include information within the context of a larger discussion on genocide. And we provide electronic access for a broad target audience through the educational website, Voices into Action. And as teachers, we all understand the importance of connecting the study of events such as the Holodomor to learning outcomes in our provincial curricula. We can identify explicit links within our curricula, both here in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba, as noted on our ministry websites. You can see before you in grade 11 in Saskatchewan, history and social studies, where we might study the rise of totalitarianism or human rights. Grade 12, we look at political rights, government ideologies, and extremism. In Manitoba, we have in grade 6, a look at immigration into, particular of the Ukrainians, into Canada. We also have genocide and oppression as a part of examining global issues, or political rights and government ideologies and extremism. We also have the opportunity to teach about human rights, persecution, and social justice in these courses. It's important to note here in Unit 2, Chapter 5 of our Voices into Action, the unit on the Ukrainian Holodomor, that our Unit 2 overall introduction begins with a comprehensive overview of genocide and includes a detailed definition. There's an explanation of genocide using Stanton's 10 stages of genocide to determine whether an action can be in fact called a genocide. There is a list of factors that motivate politicians, people, and cultures to engage in genocide. And finally, a discussion on whether genocide can be prevented from happening in the future. So for this reason, information on the general topic of genocide is not included in the Holodomor chapter. So we advise educators to begin with the study of genocide in the overview of Unit 2, and then proceed to the study of one or more of the specific examples of world genocide in Unit 2. Each chapter, of course, includes all appropriate credits and can be printed in PDF form. Now, the format of Chapter 5 is consistent with that of other chapters on genocide. So you'll note in the bottom right-hand corner, I have provided you with another QR code. This one will take you directly to the Chapter 5 of Unit 2, which is the chapter on the Holodomor. So again, feel free to use your cell phone to access that chapter. And on this frame, you will note that I've listed all of the parts of our Holodomor chapter. The structure is consistent with that of all the other chapters in Voices into Action. And on it, you can see listed the various segments in the order or the sequence that they appear in the chapter. Now, all chapters start with the Ask Yourself section, which is an inquiry-based segment that sets the tone for the chapter by asking thought-provoking questions, such as those that I've shown here. Students will have some interesting views and responses to these questions prior to their in-depth study of the chapter. These questions serve to set the focus of the inquiry. The questions are followed by survivor video, and as I wrap up my part of this webinar, we'll watch a small segment of the Holodomor video in just a very few minutes. But the video is shown very early in the chapter, of course, to capture student interest and attention. Our students, of course, we know are very much geared to being a video culture. Now, our chapter segments that follow include definitions, maps, an historical snapshot, and a timeline. Now I've listed for you the 7 artifacts. Each of our chapters includes artifacts, which include primary documents. They're not all primary documents, but we always try to include primary documents which are selected to carefully support the content and for the impact of our students' understanding. In our Voices into Action unit on the Holodomor, we also include an examination of press reporting and fake news at the time, so that your students can see that the manipulation of and by the media is nothing new. In fact, I have a separate webinar of my own on the use of fake news at different times in history, and the reporting of the Holodomor is a key focus of that particular presentation. The chapter or lesson concludes with 8 action items, which are activities that have a direct connection to the artifacts. This way, students are drawn back to real evidence about the Holodomor as they complete the action items. Now, on this page in front of you, I have given a very brief summary of some of the actions that are provided. But the actions on the website have much greater depth than I have summarized on the slide, and they have at least 2 parts or more per action. Voices into Action also provides other links to a website websites rather, that provide many survivor testimonies, as well as to other resources available about the Holodomor. So we can connect you to places for more depth, or for you to hear firsthand accounts from people from Ukraine. Additional topics have also been included in the actions and activities in the VIA resource on the Holodomor. For example, in Action 1, the denial of the Holodomor is compared to the denial of the Armenian genocide and denial of the Holocaust, while in Action 7 examines the political connection between the Great Leap Forward in China to that of the Holodomor. So to conclude my segment on this webinar, I would like to conclude by showing the first 3 minutes of a video that is embedded into our website, and it is available for you to watch, but it features Valentina Kurilu, who is the Director of Education for the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium. So I think Nadia is going to start that video for us. It's about 3 minutes long.
Yes, I will do that.
Holodomor is a word that comes from two Ukrainian words. One is holod means starvation or famine, and the second one, morete, means to torturously put to death. The definition is death inflicted by starvation, and it's a man-made famine. Created by the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian genocide, known as the Holodomor, it started in 1928, and it came to a crisis in 1932-33. It was about 4 million men, women, and children died because of starvation, because of man-made famine, the Holodomor. Stalin, he was a dictator who came to power, and he decided that he was going to make the Soviet Union into a very important state. And he wanted to build a very strong army because he was interested in spreading communism around the world. The Ukraine was conquered by the Soviet Red Army, and the Ukrainians who had tried to set up their own country for a while were now under what we call the Soviet Empire. The Soviet Union tried to control the Ukrainian population, which was not keen on communism. They also felt that they had to take over this land and the property of all these farmers. Now, it's not buying them out, it's a question of taking it. They had to take the grain away from the Ukrainian people and to ship it out overseas. They even took the seed grain, which is used for planting the new crop for the following year. They took away all the grain and all the reserves, so there was nothing to make bread out of. They took away all food, pumpkins, apples, anything that was edible. The family lived just on the outskirts of the city of Kyiv, which is the capital city of Ukraine. They were prominent farmers. My grandfather was arrested in 1929, at the beginning of 1929, as a kulak. A kulak is a rich peasant, as they called them. Stalin's policy at the very beginning was to arrest these farmers. They sent in a group of people from the secret police, which was called the GPU. They took him to prison. They just came and just took him forcibly, and he was put into the gulag. He died in 1937 in prison. My grandmother, who was still living in the house, the family home in the village, a group of people, again, from the GPU and maybe some locals, came in, and they threw her out of the house with just what she had on, 20 below, in January, and with her 5 children, because my father was not there at that time. They threw them out on the street, and they warned anybody who would help them that they would get the same kind of treatment. So some neighbor in the area did allow them to live in her barn for the winter. A little bit of everything they owned, the implements, the machinery, the livestock, their household items, their clothing, everything was going to be auctioned and given away. So they were just thrown out. They were garbage, basically, the scum of the earth. It was being done on a massive scale. There were about 1.5 million people, men, women, and children, who were affected. Most of them ended up in Siberia, some were executed, and some went to the gulag. And my father, in 1930, was arrested as the son of a gulag. The gulag is a Soviet concentration camp, so they were the first ones to suffer.
So thank you very much for taking part in the first part. And Nadia, I'm only too happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Larry. Yes, after that moving a clip from Valentina's interview, it's difficult to make the transition to part 2 because, of course, we're thinking about the horror, the tragedy of this famine. But we will move to the grade 3 integrated teaching unit so that you can hear about the work that's been done for the elementary level. And so, again, we've said that our Holodomor committee was very pleased with the results of Voices into Action and our work with FAST. We appreciated the team's spirit toward a common goal, and we are so pleased that we were able to create a resource about the Holodomor to supplement the high school curriculum. And Larry pointed out the curriculum connections in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but we know that there are curriculum connections, similar connections right across Canada. So whoever is tuned in today and listening to this presentation, please know that the outcomes that are addressed in Saskatchewan and Manitoba are likely addressed in other curriculum documents as well. So after the work on Voices into Action was completed, our committee turned its full attention to the elementary level and the need for curricular resource material about the Holodomor for young learners. And as I'm presenting on this integrated teaching unit, please feel free to browse through the unit using the link on the screen or the QR code that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. And so there's one common thread when speaking about genocide. The circumstances are always horrific, and they draw out deep human compassion, emotion, and sadness. When the cause of genocide is hunger or starvation, there is a grassroots connection for students and families in schools. Students have all experienced hunger at some point, even for a short term, when they hear that dinner isn't ready quite yet and they must wait. They may have also witnessed hunger, perhaps at the local food bank or in news reports. And through the school curriculum, students are encouraged to help those who are less fortunate through food drives, donations, or by volunteering at a community kitchen. Students do find it disturbing to learn that people die of starvation. This presents a very stark and uncomfortable reality. So for young learners, the topic of starvation and the famine genocide known as Holodomor, this topic required a very gentle approach. So how could we bring this tragic genocide to the attention of young students in an age and grade appropriate manner? Our provincial Holodomor committee brought together a subgroup of elementary teachers and consultants to form the writing team for this teaching unit. The writing team found that the unifying link to the topic of the Holodomor became wheat and its historical ties to both Canada and Ukraine. On the screen, you see an outline of the teaching unit. You also see visuals on the right-hand side of the screen to show you how you will find that unit within the STF Emma Stewart Resources website. Those are the identifying features. And so when you go into the website, these are the items that you need to access, and then you can actually download a copy of the teaching unit, and it is freely available. So through the story of wheat, our writing team felt that young students could learn about the importance of wheat growing to our economy, to our health, and to various cultures in our province. As the writing team reviewed outcomes, there emerged a very interesting overlap of themes in grade 3, particularly in social studies, in science, and in health. And that overlap promoted a very seamless integration of key ideas and facts. And I should mention here that there are also outcomes in English language arts and arts education that are applicable to the integrated unit. But we couldn't include everything in this unit, and so we did choose social studies, science, and health. And also, while grade 3 is the target level, the teaching materials within the unit can also be connected to outcomes in grade 4 and 5 in our curriculum documents. So keep that in mind. We're not limited to just the one age and grade level. On the screen, you see a summary of the main components of the teaching unit. I know that classroom teachers will find the appendices to be most helpful. Through several hands-on projects, students and their families will become engaged in the study of wheat and what can happen if we don't have enough wheat to prepare bread and other foods. The timeline that you see on the screen and within the unit provides a historical account of how wheat arrived in Canada. Students discover that wheat from Ukraine was actually mixed into a grain shipment from Glasgow, Scotland. The wheat was very hardy and grew well on the Canadian prairies. After the arrival of wheat in Canada, it wasn't long before the prairies became known as the breadbasket of Canada, rivaling Ukraine's title as the breadbasket of Europe. It's very clear why Ukrainian farmers were enticed to immigrate to Canada by Clifford Sifton in the late 1880s. They were masterful farmers who knew how to seed and harvest wheat. Through the wheat timeline, students come to understand that Ukraine and Canada became connected long ago. They also learn that when a country produces large quantities of wheat, it is shipped around the world to feed others. Through its inquiry-based approach, the unit invites students to explore the question, how much is enough wheat to feed our country? Students begin by reading the book Enough by Marcia Skripuch. They learn that a mean dictator took away all the grain from people living in the Ukrainian village of Zhytya. People in the village did not have enough food and were starving, while the dictator hoarded large quantities of wheat for his own needs. This book, written as historical fiction, is then followed by a very short true story about a woman named Maria Soroka, who lives in Vinnytsia, a province or oblast of Ukraine. In 2012, Maria found a bottle filled with wheat buried near her village home. Soroka's grandfather hid the grain in a bottle in 1932, hoping to save his family from starvation during the Holodomor. Students are then invited to participate in a project to create their own wheat in a bottle as a reminder of this true story. They come to understand that wheat holds the power to feed many people. In fact, wheat can feed entire countries around the world. We're really fortunate that students, families, and staff from Holy Family School in North Battleford shared a photo montage of their Wheat in a Bottle project with our writing team. And there is a link to this video clip within the teaching unit. And I will play it for you today. So if you could just bear with me for a moment. I am going to minimize my screen. And again, playing the clip. So moving on to the next slide. There's one final project proposed in the teaching unit, and it involves wheat growing, either in the classroom or as a home-based project with families. The students can plant 5 wheat kernels and track their growth over several months. The symbolism of planting 5 grains of wheat is directly related to the law of 5 stalks of grain implemented by Joseph Stalin in 1932. The law was designed to punish any man, woman, or child in Ukraine who picked up scraps of food, including a few meager grains of wheat, from the ground. And some of this material is meant for, as background information for parents and others. And parents appreciate seeing the relationship of this classroom project to this historical famine genocide called Holodomor. And then finally, to end the unit, a bread baking project is suggested to illustrate how wheat can be transformed from grain to flour to bread. The aroma of fresh bread, its tasty flavor and texture, are very real reminders that bread plays a central role in many family meals in Saskatchewan. Students have the opportunity to explore the kinds of bread that is baked in different cultures. Often, breads are connected to special family events, celebrations, or religious traditions. Therefore, through the theme of wheat and the hands-on projects described in the last few slides, young students become more aware of the meaning of hunger and its tragic effects on many people. Without undue emphasis on the topic of starvation or famine, the outcomes in this grade 3 teaching unit are achieved. So now, a few words of thanks before we conclude the presentation. The Holodomor Awareness and Education Committee is very thankful to the writing team for their creative, thoughtful development of the grade 3 integrated teaching unit. We appreciate the support of the STF Emma Stewart Resources Center in reviewing and posting the unit. The Holodomor Committee and FAST recognize the contributions of that particular writing and editorial team in creating Unit 2, Chapter 5, of Voices into Action. This was a tremendous collaborative effort, and it was very successful. We could not have succeeded without the dedicated efforts and contributions of all of the volunteer writers and reviewers whose names appear on the screen. Bravo to everyone who gave their time and talents to the 2 writing projects. And lastly, we appreciate the support of the UCC Saskatchewan office in providing the platform for today's Zoom session. In addition to the 2 resources we have highlighted for you today, There are other resources worth exploring. Check out the Holodomor webpage on the UCC Saskatchewan site using the QR code on the screen. Scroll down to the bottom of the screen for some of our best picks, and they appear in a nice tile format. The website of the Holodomor Research and Education Center also has valuable information, research articles, and other resources for classroom or personal use. So please take some time to explore the web links that have been given today, and in particular, the information about the Holodomor that's in these websites. If you have questions following this webinar, please feel free to contact the presenters by email, and our emails appear on the screen.